Bullshit. You don't know the story about the 6888? Sit down, get comfortable, because I'm about to tell you the story of the 6888. Birmingham, England, 1945. And we're in the thick of World War II, and the entire planet is on edge because of the uncertainty of the future. Back home, civilian relatives of brave service members are riddled with anxiety and worry because they're afraid of losing their loved ones. So they start pouring all of their love and concern into millions of photographs, gifts, letters, all going overseas to try to reach their loved ones that are fighting in the war. They had to transform hangars and warehouses into makeshift orphanages to hold all the unopened mail that had yet to reach the service members. As Allied forces marched across Europe, that created an ever-shifting location for the mail, which created staggering delays for troops. One general even estimated it would take 6 months to process all of the backlogged mail. So now everyone wondered, who would take on what was known to be a personnel problem? See, this problem is a lot bigger than you may think. The psychological impact of not receiving mail on deployment or during war times will shoot morale to an all-time low for service members. Yes, mail is the #1 contributing factor to morale boost. I'll do you a better one. I'll paint you this picture. No mail equals low morale for service members, which means they become underperforming service members, which means we lose the war. But see, just 2 years prior, there was the creation of the Women's Army Corps, but no one could have foreseen the importance that would play 2 years later in 1945. But just a year prior, 1942, there was the Women's Auxiliary Corps, but it lacked military status, so a year later, 1943, was birthed the Women's Army Corps. The only reason it was accepted for black women to enlist into the Women's Army Corps was thanks to Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune and the support of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. Because this was during the times of the Jim Crow era, which made it not acceptable for African Americans, period, to be in the military. So the Army was still not in full acceptance of this, even though they were allowed to enlist. The black servicewomen were not allowed to deploy overseas as they had to watch their white service counterparts deploy. In response to this, black civil rights leaders pressed the War Department. The War Department finally relented in November of 1944, and volunteers began to trickle in slowly, with an exceptional group emerging. There came the all-black Women's Army Corps of 31 officers, 824 enlisted personnel. They were officially known as the 6888 Central Postal Directory Battalion. You might know them as the 6888. The 6888 consisted of companies A, B, C, and D, and they even had their own headquarters. Lieutenant Colonel Charity Edna Adams, at the time of the story was a major, commanded the entire battalion. These women were trained to crawl under logs, jump over trenches, and march with rucksacks. And they were also trained to know the difference between the American Winchester M12 shotgun and a German Carbiner 98 Bravo rifle. So despite being tasked with support duties, these women were battle ready. February 1945, the battalion's first contingent set sail on the Ile-de-France while German U-boats littered the vast ocean. Upon arrival in Scotland, the contingent was greeted with German V-1 rockets, forcing them to run for cover. After this dangerous voyage, the contingent finally arrived in Birmingham, England, but what awaited them would have sent most people running. Frigid but barely lit warehouses housing forgotten packages and letters stacked tall as monuments, with packages that were eaten through by rats with now rotten sweets. The 6888 got straight to work in the dead of the winter, alternating between 8-hour shifts to guarantee non-stop progress of the backlogged mail. Draped in coats and long johns, the women's first achievement was developing a tracking system which resolved the issue of soldiers that shared the same last name, and that was 7 million information cards they had to maintain. Other tasks included redirecting undeliverable mail and packages, investigating wrongfully or incorrectly addressed mail, and probably the hardest of them all, handling mail of those who had already died in battle before they could receive that mail. The residents of Birmingham, England were so fascinated with the 6888, it was common for them to drop by the warehouse and just watch the battalion work. These visits would go on to form a bond with the local community, and from time to time, they would invite these women over to their homes for tea. Despite the hard work that these women were putting in during the dead winter, the military was still not welcoming to their presence, being that they were still African American. So they still experienced segregation and second-class treatment. Separation of cafeteria, recreational facilities, and living quarters by gender and ethnicity. Major Adams led a boycott to address these disparities, but in the meantime, the 6888 just maintained their own facilities, including a cafeteria, a hair salon, and their own recreational facility. Despite exemplary work in a job that no one wanted, racist attitudes influenced inspectors to have so much criticism on their job performance. During one infamous encounter, Major Adams stopped a male general from inspecting the quarters' private rooms while some women slept. Because if Major Adams is already there, why should a male general be inspecting the quarters of private rooms for females and some of the females are asleep? Then this general tried to berate Major Adams, yelling at her, asking her why are some of her troops missing. But she tried to explain, stating they're working 8-hour shifts to continue the processing of the mail, but the general completely interrupted her. This general threatened Major Adams that he would send a white superior officer to show her how to do the job that she was already doing so well. Without breaking protocol, Major Adams looked at this general and said, "Over my dead body." After this incident, there was a chaplain assigned to the unit, which the women had to report in for counseling, that interrupted the operations, causing leave without absence for some of these women in the unit. But still, the 6888 bloomed away with their new innovative tracking system, allowing them to process 65,000 pieces of mail per shift. What was originally deemed as a 6-month backlog was now gone in 3 months. This golden period of appreciation would be short-lived as their skills and efficiency would be called upon in Rouen, France. These women attracted so much acclaim that the European Theater's Deputy Commander, Lieutenant General John C.H. Lee, delayed his trains so that the 6888 could ride in the first-class car. It would seem inevitable that tragedy would somehow eventually meet this unit. In early July of 1945, a tragic Jeep accident took the lives of Privates Mary Bankston and Mary Barlow. A month later, Sergeant Dolores M. Brown would succumb to her injuries from that very same accident. The saddest part about this story is the War Department did not pay for the funeral. Instead, First Lieutenant Dorothy Scott found a trio of battalion mates with mortuary experience to help lay their fellow servicewomen to rest. Bankston, Barlow, and Brown were all laid to rest at Normandy's American Cemetery. They were buried with honors and caskets that their sisters in arms had paid for. When the 6888 were moved to Paris in October of 1945, it signaled the unprecedented treatment that they had previously received, because now they had things like chef-cooked meals and maid services. But yet again, they were facing yet another daunting workload and a new challenge: deep cuts in personnel, being reduced by 300 with another 200 going home. See, the 6888 experienced morale as low as some of the soldiers whose mail they were sorting at the time. The 6888 would arrive back home in America February of 1946 to no fanfare, no thank you for your service, and no job well done. The group's only lone recognition was Major Charity Adams, as she was promoted to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, which was well deserved. In 2021, the 6888 received the Congressional Gold Medal. They were recognized for a lot of other different things that I don't have enough time to put into this video. As someone who served in the Marine Corps and I did postal services on a deployment, I have nothing but the utmost respect for the 6868. Salute to these sisters. Now you know who the 6868 is. Hit that follow button. Aslongaswetracking.